Welcome. We'll be starting very shortly, but welcome all. As I said, welcome to everyone joining. We'll be starting very shortly, but thank you very much for joining us today. Okay, well, I think we'll get started. Others will join us, but let's get cracking. Welcome to this Innovation Forum webinar, where we will be discussing how digital transformation and AI in particular are driving the energy transition. I'm Ian Welsh, and I will be your host for the next hour or so. There's no doubt that digitalisation is no longer a side enabler. It's becoming central to system-wide acceleration, efficiency, and optimization. Questions remain, however, around scalability, cost, and how quickly the sector can realistically move. So among the topics we'll be aiming to cover today are matters such as where digital tools and AI are already delivering tangible value in the energy transition, how digitalisation can help address system bottlenecks, barriers to adoption, the partnerships that can work, and the sorts of digital breakthroughs that can have the biggest impact over the coming years. Now, we have got an expert panel to help frame the discussion today. We have Dr. Jana Hoon from SSE, we have Adele Ara from Lightsource BP, and Carsten Sonne-Schmidt from Digital Energy AI. Welcome to you all. And my thanks to Innovation Forum's Natasha Bodnar for bringing the panel together. I'll turn to the panel shortly, but we do want to hear from all of you. Please be thinking about points and questions that you'd like me to put to our experts and write them in the Q&A box on your Zoom window. Please note your name and organisation when doing so. You can, of course, up-like others' questions by clicking the thumbs up, and the more likes, the greater the chances that I will put that question to the panel. We are recording the webinar. I'm sure with everybody in the Okay. Jim, welcome. Perhaps you can set the scene a little bit around industry challenges from SSE's perspective, and in particular, how networks are using or adopting and adapting to provide the power necessary for data centers as a starting point. Gianna.
Thank you, Ian, and yeah, absolutely delighted to be here today. And also thank you for everyone for dialing in. Yeah, like really interested to kind of to be part of the conversation today. And I think what is particularly interesting when you're looking at the energy industry is basically there is this dual part, almost dual approach to AI. Where on the one hand, we're trying to power the AI sort of revolution industry. So like all of the power that AI is consuming needs to come from somewhere. And as a renewable energy provider, we're trying to basically plug that gap. But on the other hand, we're also obviously adopting quite a lot of like AI within the organization kind of in itself. But wherever you kind of turn to at the moment, we're seeing a huge boost in conversation around data centers. Wherever you turn, you open the FT in the morning, that like 9 out of 10 times there will be an article on data centers, the AI bubble, and where it's kind of going to go. Related kind of to that, where we kind of see obviously demand, like data centers, like huge demand growth spike. It's like great also for renewable energy. We can get more power so like out there. But some of the people on the call may have also heard that it's causing constraints on the grid. So particularly looking towards like data centers and the amount of power they're consuming. So you hear it from international examples as well. So you look to somewhere like Ireland, there was a moratorium that had to be sort of like basically initiated. So the question for us really is like how can we avoid a repeat that sort of data centers just sap energy, so like from the grid, but it can actually, from an innovation perspective, also like help us manage the grid. So there's some like structural things we're putting in place also as a networks organization. So if you look at the UK, there's a connections reform coming in. So there's like new prioritization so of projects. And we're also just massively building out the network so that data centers can actually get connected. But the big thing is like actually collaborating with government on it. So having an industrial strategy for data centers is quite key to make sure that all of the various areas, so your technology, your markets, your grid, everything basically works in tandem and make sure that you're moving in the right direction and you don't end up with something that's completely fragmented and actually overburdening the electricity system, but can actually deliver really good value. I think that's a huge chunk where innovation comes in, because the data centers of the future can provide grid services rather than being a black box that saps it. So hugely interesting space at the moment, data centers. And as you can see, everyone's talking about it, and it's probably a key defining industry for us.
Yeah, that would be my next question then. How can AI help develop smarter networks, ensuring the power is where it's needed, or indeed when it can be utilized, particularly, given with renewable energy, often it's available at times when there isn't the demand for its use.
Actually, and like I will preface, like I am no data scientist, but I think what a lot of what we've kind of seen over the last couple of months in particular, it's the value of data that's coming through. Because for example, like as grids or like renewable assets that we have, we produce a lot of data, and actually a lot of the data is also sort of like in the public domain. And I think that works actually quite well with AI, because what AI feeds on or learns from is data. So if you have well organized data sets, that's actually really useful. And to kind of make it a little bit less abstract, but kind of give you kind of a bit more examples of what I mean when it comes to the value of data. So number two of our like main projects that we run for transmission, if you look at transmission lines, so the lovely towers like in the background, so effect of my picture or background picture. So what we something that we call dynamic line rating. So we use AI to basically we deploy monitors on existing infrastructure lines, and we deploy AI to basically model the real life conditions. So you have to think about, as soon as you transfer electricity, you will lose it like over distance, and there's a certain safety level. So if it's dry, if it's cold, if it's raining, like it has an impact on it. So we have environmental monitors now on our lines that tell us this is the amount that is safe to run, the amount of this is the amount of electricity that's safe to run through the lines. That means actually through that AI has helped us to maximize the existing network, which means we reduce costs by not having to build new ones. And to give you a scale of the impact, if you think about all of the UK combined, through dynamic line rating, you can actually you can have 15% more capacity running through the lines. So there's a huge chunk of actually like AI helping us make electricity cheaper and helping us just like run the network actually better. And the same thing if you're looking at just network modeling networks loads, so kind of making sure that at all times we know how much electricity is going through where, and basically where people can connect into the network also at a distribution level. That means that kind of can help local authorities with their strategic spatial planning. So you kind of have just a lot better view, and a lot of it comes down to a well structured granular view of data and knowing what to do with the data. So basically, we've seen like a huge jump from working a lot on spreadsheets and people just kind of actually start having handwritten spreadsheets to replacing it with AI and digital technologies. And it's been a huge jump, I would say, in capacity and capability in what we can deliver.
And so then you're going to be using AI in the future, you think is going to be, eliminating or smoothing out surges in power availability and demand, and just ensuring that power is where it needs to be when it needs to be there.
That's the plan. So hopefully that's sort of, that is sort of like what we're working kind of towards. But yes, it's definitely, so basically you have your peaks and your troughs. And so the idea is that through AI, we have a better view of the system, so you can shave your peaks, and basically you can use the grid, for example, when power is, for example, cheap out there, to kind of make sure it goes where basically yeah, power goes where kind of where it needs to go. But obviously the classic also, you fill up batteries when the wind doesn't blow, like the sun doesn't shine, like when like the hydro dams aren't running. So it's like when basically the intermittent nature of renewable energy takes over, you can use AI to make sure where are you going to have a constraint zone, where are you going to have a peak. So it's a lot of the demand forecasting, predicting, and just making sure that actually the generation sources are connected to where the electricity is needed in basically like the most resilient and again like cheapest way. So I think that is where we kind of seeing a lot of applications for AI. There's a lot of operation and maintenance, I would say, as well, where you can actually go and just help us like operate it in a safer way. Again, if you're sort of like imagining you have to climb up on this transmission tower, right? You have to fix some things up there. So if you actually know there is an outage or there isn't an outage, so kind of having better visibility of what is happening where, I think is like a key application for us in AI.
Great, thanks very much. Great point to turn to Adele, but I'll come to Adele in a second. Just a reminder to audience, please be thinking about questions and points. We have them arriving in already. Thanks very much. But do be thinking about your questions and the points you'd like us to talk about a little bit later in the webinar. Adele, welcome. On the point that Jana was just talking about there, from the prospect of an energy project developer, how do you think AI can help make sites develop more efficiently?
Thank you, Ian. Jan and Carsten, it's lovely to be here today, and thanks to the audience for tuning in. For those of you who don't know Lightsource BP, we are a developer and an operator of onshore renewable energy project and BESS projects, and we operate across 19 different countries. So we have the great advantage of being able to see our project throughout the entirety of the life cycle, from the very early greenfield development phases up to operational phase. And we have looked at a number of different AI application to help us gain effectively two main targets. On one end, we focused on how we can supercharge the productivity of our teams. On the other end, we look at what type of technology can help us increase the level of efficiency in our development process or increase the level of resilience in our operation. The approach we have taken is very much one of start by very small use cases, as opposed to go for an enterprise-wide type of approach. And we found that the highest level of value in our application is very much when we put one of our very precious data scientists sitting next to a frontline team, understanding their challenges, how they operate, and see how AI can support them. We have rolled out a number of different initiatives within the organization. One is a very classical enhancement of productivity approach, which is very much based on AI and agentic AI to an extent, and that is very much about creating a virtual assistant for our team, particularly the team that deal with heavy documentation or heavy data sets. And that very much spans from increasing the level of compliance throughout our development process, speeding up turnaround for tender processes, and particularly also speeding up our technical assurance when it comes to compare the ultimate design of our site vis-a-vis what our technical specifications are. So use cases where we would have taken a couple of weeks to review full design optimization for the purposes of our technical assurance will now take a matter of a couple of days. Similarly, we have looked at how we can accelerate and create competitive advantage when we look at site selection in the very early stages of our greenfield development. And this is really a combination of advanced analytics and machine learning that our geospatial team has created with our data scientists. And very much we look at how do we generate early assessments of site suitability for one of our plans. Effectively, we collate quite a variety of different data sources and very quickly scan them and identify areas where a solar plant, a wind farm, a BESS could be decently placed with limited landscape constraint and reasonable access to the grid. Back in the day, 5 years ago, we were taking anything from 3 to 5 days to run one of these assessments very manually. Today is a matter of minutes. So this also creates a degree of competitive advantage when we want to enter in a new market and try to accelerate our ability to identify suitable area. Of course, working also on the operational side of things, there are a number of things we can do from a resilience perspective of our sites too.
Yeah, on the compliance side of things, how far are you finding that the regulators, authorities are accepting of the use of AI in you accelerating your you're choosing the site and all the criteria that you have to take into account? Are you finding an acceptance that you can use AI to accelerate that?
Well, I would say that primarily, what we use the AI application for is to accelerate our internal processes, right? And therefore, it is absolutely essential that the talent profile that we employ, the competence, the experience of our employees is supported by and not substituted by, right? So we look at it as an accelerator. We would never submit to anybody anything that is done through AI. That is effectively helping us delivering more with the same resources that we have. And expanding their ability to cover more projects within the same time frame that we have today. We would, for our own internal purposes, we would not simply trust the black box, if you like. And it's quite important, right? Because from a talent perspective, we absolutely need to protect the industry talent that we have and make sure that we continue to grow young graduate and younger talent coming out of engineering or environmental university studies and bring them up to speed. Right? It's very important that we don't lose that professional capability of critique the outcome and the output of these tools, which are extremely helpful, but not yet substituting a human being, thankfully.
That's, I'm sure we're all very pleased to hear that one. Thank you very much for that. So perhaps you can talk a bit about the sorts of operational resiliences then that AI can help provide.
So we have looked at a number of different options, and again, starting small and starting from, I would say, I'll pick up on something that Jana said around making sure that you have the right data, right? We have truly started invested 5 years ago on our data core, our own data lake, making sure that we have control over the data flows of our operating fleet. That has been a cornerstone and a foundational part of our digital core strategy. And frankly, what we can do today with machine learning is a result of having invested in this data lake approach quite a few years ago. We have looked at various use cases that would allow us to do two things. One is creating more resilience for our operation, particularly in situations where our sites might be affected by natural catastrophe scenarios. And others are how do we hopefully do our bit to help our transmission and grid operator by providing ever more accurate forecasting. So in the first case, we have developed a machine learning application and landscape really is a bit of an ecosystem whereby we run our own expectations for weather forecast when it comes to hailstorms. And if we do believe that an hailstorm is likely to hit one of our sites, through an agentic piece, we automatically store our panels in a protective position, so we protect from any mechanical damage. And that we have been doing successfully for a number of years now. In terms of how do we try to be a more, if not, we cannot be controlled, but we can try to predict our behavior as generators as much as possible and therefore hopefully support the resilience of the system. We are now looking at how we can forecast 5 minutes ahead intervals through the deployment of sky and cloud cameras on site, and then machine learning and algorithm to effectively predict both where the clouds are going to be in the next 5 minutes and how that will impact the production of our sites, and then pass the information through to our partners in the grid and distribution. So there are a number of use cases that we can deploy also during the operational phase to make sure that we are one good corporate citizen when it comes to our participation to the grid and transmission, but also really protect the investments and protect the long-term longevity of our portfolio.
Thank you very much. Fascinating stuff. There's lots to come back on there, but thank you very much for now. Carsten, welcome. Delighted to see you got the blue webinar shirt memo, so thank you very much for that. Thank you for joining us. You work with companies in the energy sector to use AI to identify opportunities. So what examples can you give of AI solutions working in practice?
We work mainly in sort of the more traditional energy space, which I believe still accounts for around 60% of the global energy mix. And through the lens of energy transition, we believe that is still an industry that is worth trying to do more efficient. So when we work with our clients, we basically, I think as already mentioned, we try to find areas where you can do more with less. And when we say less, it's basically reduced resources, which can be cost or emission or people. And what we often find is that if we find something where you can do more with less, you get benefits on all three parameters. And how we typically do it, we go through a phase of analytics. We look for these opportunities. Sometimes we're using AI to scan the opportunities, and then we come up with a long list. And instead of doing enterprise-wide transformations from the outset. It could be the vision. We start with small POCs, get some buy-in, and then start executing to show value and get adoption, which is an important part of being successful in a transformation. So that's typically how we work with our clients. So take that first step of identifying and then come up with a prioritized list where we can demonstrate that there's value for the buck. And what we often see is actually negative abatement cost in some of these opportunities.
So working in the, as you say, the more traditional energy sector, what are the sorts of efficiencies that you're finding AI will help find?
Well, I guess in most industries, and especially in the traditional energy, there's quite a complex supply chain. And what we see again and again is that supply chain often becomes a residual of how you plan. And there's typical inefficiencies from your sourcing to how you manage your inventory to how you manage your logistics. And AI, or more specific, machine learning, can help tremendously in how you predict and how you optimize. For example, doing logistics planning can be so many different variables, and the human brain can simply not come up with the optimal path. And machine learning can help tremendously with that. And we have on average, I think on the logistics, 20 to 30% emission reduction, just coming from reduction in fuel, which is also a reduction in cost, which makes it negative abatement cost. The same on inventory, reduction in waste, but on the economic side, an improvement in working capital. So we're really trying to hit the points where it's sustainable AI solutions that are helping on both the cost or the economics, but also on the emissions. And the supply chain side is typically where you can get a lot of value for the effort.
So I guess the approach you take is that perhaps the lowest hanging fruit in terms of reducing environmental impact, reducing emissions, is to make current energy supply as efficient as possible now, whilst there is the energy transition.
That's correct. I guess with 60% of the global energy mix still in oil and gas, or thereabout, it's important not to forget that that will exist for the next decade. So we are trying to do that and help being able to both produce and consume that in the most efficient way.
So how then will AI solutions evolve then as the energy transition itself evolves? And I would imagine that whilst you're trying to make the current system as efficient as possible, it's it's still part of the energy transition. So, sorry, slightly rambling question, but how will AI solutions evolve as energy transition itself evolves?
So I believe that the AI models needs to be more fit for purpose, and you will see a rise in smaller models. A lot of the new energy demand and energy supply, for that matter, will come from developing countries. And you won't necessarily be able just to get access to the big models that are being used and wrapped and so on as what we have today. And I think for us to be successful and help as much as possible the developing countries in making a stride towards efficiency with AI, we need to push towards smaller fit-for-purpose models that I can see more and more are doing, but I definitely see that will evolve to help the energy transition. Also for microgrids and sort of point solutions.
And do you see the market for your sort of current, traditional energy AI solutions? Do you see that developing more in developing economies at the moment, whilst developed economies, are perhaps moving ahead with the transition to a more renewable energy system?
Yeah, well, I think the developed countries are trying to advance as much as they can on the renewable agenda, where emerging economies, they are trying to catch up as quickly as possible, and it can be easier with some of the more traditional energies. in terms of AI, I think the benefit of smaller AI models fit for purpose will benefit wherever you are. And we do see cross learnings also from the more traditional energy companies into how you construct and deploy and manage your supply chain, for example, for solar. So we also have clients in that space where you can have some cross learnings and use the same approaches and frameworks.
Okay, thank you. Audience, do be thinking of questions. Thanks for those that have put their questions in already, but do be thinking of your points you'd like us to cover or questions you have for any of the panelists as we go. I would like to actually turn back to Adele and Gianna to think a little bit more about the, whilst we're talking about energy transition, the importance to, for efficiencies now rather than, efficiencies in the future. I know this might not be your specific area of expertise, but Adele, I wonder how you'd approach the sort of the challenges that Carsten was talking about, covering, whilst we're developing renewable energy, we've got to, keep the lights running with what we've got as efficiently as possible.
Sorry, I couldn't find the mute button. At least I didn't start with the mute button on. I suppose, there are always two, whenever we look at this deployment, there are always two levels, right? One is looking inside the organization and how we can create additional efficiency. At the end of the day, our aim is to deploy as quickly as possible, as much renewable as possible. We truly believe that really makes a difference, not only for sustainability purposes, but only really for energy affordability purposes, and in a way, energy sovereign purposes. The other element is how do we bring our technology and the services we provide and the electricity we provide to the next level of industrialization effectively. And there are a number of different ways we can do that, considering that we have an unprogrammable source behind us, right? And so one of the things that, for example, we are, and this might be quite similar to the example that Carsten was discussing, one of the things that we are thinking of is, today we design plants as we have designed them for the last few years, and is an established ways of working, if you like. How do we do that in a smarter way in the future? Do we really build, multiple hundreds of megawatt solar sites in a field in the same way tomorrow that we have built them in the past, right? And there are very many different scenarios that we can run. And how do we build them and, if you like, project what the revenue stack is going to be when we have the solar next to the battery and the different market dynamics and revenue stack that are available there. To Carsten's point, the challenge for us is effectively there is only that much scenario planning that a person can do with an Excel, right? And therefore, although it's still very much in pilot phase, but those scenarios where we actually use AI to say, this is almost impossible future that I'm imagining. Does it work? Does it not? Run me 35 scenarios to tell me what the future might look like, right? That type of heavy lifting, kind of imaginary work, right? And the ability of processing that very quickly and then to educate us today on how we can deliver more reliable energy in the future is one of the applications that we're looking at. Of course, the human capability of reviewing what actually is the art of the possible after we get those results is still there and remains there.
Thank you. Gianna, Jenny, any further thoughts on the need for efficiencies now versus efficiencies in the future and how AI can help develop those?
I can only agree with what Adele just said and what Carsten said before her. I think there's a reason also why it's called the transition, right? So because we're not redesigning something new in completely isolation. You see, the analogy always kind of like to use we're redesigning the plane by flying it. So, and I think it would be quite irresponsible to throw the playbook basically out the window and say we're starting from scratch. But I think it is kind of that transition piece where we're kind of looking, okay, how are we operating today with a lot of future energy scenarios also out there, and with that those what ifs and kind of predicting, not necessarily trying to predict what the future is going to hold, but to kind of think to, if any of these scenarios happen, what does that mean for the here and now, and how can we make sure it's adaptive, it's resilient? And I think AI has a huge part to play, because what AI helps us to do is understand realities a lot quicker. So you're kind of looking at like between your weather for like more accurate weather forecasts so that you actually know when there's going to be like a storm, when there's going to be floods, fires, all of that. So that climate resilience part, I think that comes through that where AI can help us quite a lot. So it's that making it easier or more accurate to predict a multitude of futures and to cut through that complexity and kind of being like, okay, what does it actually mean in practice? I think that is where like AI is going to come in. And I think that's going to be really important for the future planning. However, on the back end, obviously, we do all have assets that we run today that are delivering that, keeping the lights on, so like at the moment. And I think also to again to Adele's point of like there is a role of AI in helping us run them quicker, build new capacities like quicker. There's so many assets in the pipeline. Like if we want to actually hit something like 2030s like decarbonization goals, we have to almost like half the deployment time for like a lot of assets that are in the pipeline. And that is like where I can help us from a planning point of view, consenting. Like we have like in Scotland, we've used, for example, a new AI tool for stakeholder engagement. So it's like a responsible use of AI, but just dealing with a mass of information. And I think we sometimes have to remind ourselves what's the base of AI, and the base of AI is being able to cut through a lot of data noise very quickly and effectively, and it has a multitude of applications.
Thank you very much. Carsten, do you want to comment on the examples that Gianna and Adele have introduced in their experience in practice?
Well, I can only agree. I think, as has been mentioned, using AI for planning, using it to shorten the delivery time, looking at some of the complexities different is a very important application and use case of AI. And the challenge is massive if we want to be successful with this transition. I think there's maybe one point that I often see, and that is a lot of people are focused on the data and the standardization and then trying to get the data to show the best way through AI to execute faster. What is often forgotten is all of the different contractors and vendors that exist in that value chain. And sometimes they are serviced by contracts and KPIs that might be decades old. And what we tend to see is you will have one contractor that is motivated to be fast, one that's motivated to be low on cost, one that's motivated to have high reliability. But when you actually look across and you want to achieve lowest emission or fastest deployment, and you have AI looking horizontally, it sometimes goes against what the individual player would like to do and is motivated to do. So there's also a sort of a concept rethink in terms of that value chain or supply chain and contract management.
Thanks very much. Well, let me turn now to questions from the audience. Thanks very much for those that have submitted. Please do be thinking about your own questions if you've not yet put them to the panel. Now I will bring them in. We have a question for you, Gianna. Our questioner, Dave Roberts, says that as the grid server, you must see the sort of spikes in demand that AI data centers that they produce. He gives examples of ramp rates, black starts, load changes. What sort of things are you seeing, and how does the grid react to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one thing where like we see a huge demand spike being driven by data centers, it is a kind of just calling out that we are slowly moving to more like centralized sort of like planned grids. So I think in the same way we have like demand surges for most of like basically big, I'm going to call them like consumers of data. So you'll see kind of similar things with hospitals, for example, with ports, for example, data centers. So if you're looking at any of the big industrial kinds or industrial complexes, so they will always kind of be peaks and troughs. And I think one of the biggest challenges of like for them from the network's perspective is actually because they're part of like what we call like the network's queue, so that a lot of the data centers that want to develop or in the pipeline aren't actually connected to the grid yet, because we're trying not to have the grid sort of like overwhelmed. So I would kind of see that as like the demand curves that we're kind of seeing coming generally from big industrial players, and that's kind of what we're trying to manage so far as the grid. I mean, just to give like one example that was so particular in the UK is kind of always used to show like demand cycles. So if like in the networks, is if you're looking at popular telenovelas coming on, we have like a massive spike basically whenever there's a commercial break because people went to go and make a cup of tea. So very, very much the British approach. So the huge element is not just the industrial customers, it's also consumer behavior and move to flexibility. When are people plugging in their EVs? What are you like? When are people like putting smart fridges basically on the network? So there's a lot of demand spikes, but as we're moving to a centrally planned system, you balance demand and supply at all times. So that is a flat networks curve basically. So that is what we're trying to do through the networks provider system.
So are you seeing, this is my next question is going to be, are you seeing the sort of electricity spikes like when everyone turns on their oven at Christmas or a cup of tea after the end of the traders, for example? Is that the same sort of spike you're seeing from data centers?
So not just from data centers. So we're seeing it from all industrial clients. And again, I think it's one of those you see a lot of the data center talk is basically there's a lot of assets in the queue, but not too many actually have been connected. So I think it's a bit of a theory versus practice. So if you look at how many data centers are connected today to the network, so these spikes that we're seeing, they come from all industrial customers and consumers. However, if you're looking forward to how many more data centers would like to connect right now, if you could plug all of them into the system tomorrow, the lights would not turn on. So basically, that is sort of like it's in the planning phase. So you hear a lot of talk about data centers. You have a lot of them in the pipeline, but the problem is actually the how many more data centers you want to connect, how many demand surges there are, and what you can physically plug into the network. And so it's that like managing through the connections queue, how much the grid can actually take so it doesn't get overwhelmed. So yes, we see the spikes, but for now, probably put data centers, what is connected, the connected load, into the same category with consumers and other industrial customers.
And do you see, as AI develops, that data centers may actually go off grid?
I think there's a real risk of that. And I think that's where we have to work quite closely also with the regulator, with government. And that's why, for example, we keep calling for like an industrial strategy for data centers, because data centers, particularly, not only they need electricity, they also need land, they need water, they need quite a lot of things. And I think as AI surges and you have hyperscalers, for example, I think the risk of having a private generation source and a private wire and therefore like slightly fragmenting the market, it is a real risk. So you can either see and you could either go down like say we've got like the Irish route of saying there's a moratorium, you can't build them anymore, or you actually say, okay, if we can't connect you to the network, you can pull private wires to your own generator sources. And that way you have a huge market fragmentation risk and who owns it and a security risk. So it becomes really complex and complicated really quickly. So I think that's where it is a real threat. There is a real opportunity as well. But I think it has to move forward in a coordinated way. Otherwise, you're gonna end up in a basically data center is going to drive us to somewhere where we don't want to go. But it's not saying that there is no opportunity in it because if you do it in the right way, actually data centers can bring a lot of system services as well. And I think getting that balance that's where that comes down to government and having a coordinated approach to data centers.
Well, always next question really, Adele, is to you. Are you finding that data center providers are coming to you to say, well, getting the power we need from the grid is a challenge. Build us a power station.
So we definitely it is a booming and trending market from a renewable generation and renewable energy supply perspective, of course. And so we do have a number of discussions ongoing with a number of developers of data center hyperscalers. Now, it really does vary. It really depends in which geography we are operating and the status of grid, right? So the approach that we are using in the United States, for example, is very different from the one that we have here, where perhaps capacity is not so easily available, and therefore there is, Jenna was describing of private wire, and therefore independent generation, if you like, is more prominent that, for example, we are experiencing in the US, where there is far more load. Really, it's a very bespoke conversation that we have depending on the market conditions and the specific grid and transmission system requirements in the different geographies where we are. And we see everything, to be fair. We see data centers where, really keen to have a double supply, and we see others that instead have already somehow determined that they would like to be off grid. Other that are, undecisive and going through the development process. Actually, quite interestingly, there is a lot of commonality between the skills, capability, and processes that you follow up to develop a renewable energy plant, and the same process you have to follow to get then approval and build a data center, right? So we are kind of akin as industries in more than one front.
Thank you. And Carsten, do you want to comment on how you think AI models will develop to deal with the challenges that Gianna and Adele have just raised there, particularly perhaps thinking about hybrid models for data centers and other high industrial users of energy?
Yeah, I think first the demand for data centers is clearly there and is growing. And if the regulators and if society as a whole cannot find a solution for providing that demand or providing that supply in a consistent way, then the market will find other ways. And I do think that AI can either help a role to help the sort of an organized way of creating microgrids that are still coordinated and organized in kind of a hybrid way, in predicting where there will be surges, predicting how you can maybe put the location of these data centers close to clients, whatever you want to do. It's not an area I have a deep expertise in, but I definitely see that if there's not a solution, especially in Europe, in terms of how we are planning for the supply, then there will be other solutions coming to the market, which might not be what we want to see.
Just got a question that's leading on from this, and asking about the future potentially of multiple private wire networks and the grid trading energy in real time. I mean, I guess this is the sort of model that's been developing at a domestic level in some markets, where people with panels on their roofs connected to the grid will be buying in energy at certain times, perhaps into a battery domestically, and then selling at times when there's surplus. Are you seeing, Jan, I mean, is this kind of model going to expand into an industrial scale, do you think?
I think so. So we're kind of seeing a lot of, both from the regulator, but also from the market itself, like a huge push towards more flexibility in the market, where basically the networks provider are procuring flexibility services. And I think so it is a huge market. I think we need to be careful in terms of how these markets are designed, because I think whenever you're trying to fix one problem, you start a problem somewhere else. So I think in terms of like how these markets are designed, there's a risk of unintended consequences. But I think we are seeing a push towards more flexible markets. And I think it would be, with if we imagine a move to fully flexible networks, fully flexible markets, it would be odd to have them in a non-smart way. So kind of all of the appliances that you'll have a smart digital grid, you'll have your smart appliances, you have your vehicle to grid charging. So it's like a lot of consumer-led flexibility, and also like asset-led flexibility as well that enters the market. I think there's a huge driver for that. And again, like AI has a big role to play in terms of orchestrating a lot of these to make sure where you're going to get them. So you have aggregators, what are the revenues that kind of sits behind it, to make sure that you have the right procurement in place. But I think we also need to be careful that flexibility, similar to AI, is not going to be the silver bullet to everything, because there's also that certain tipping point where managing the network in a completely different way as it is now. The way we basically at the moment charge costs is everyone who's dialed in today from basically everyone who's dialed in today, our electricity bill is how we pay for networks up charges and also network upgrades. So if we run it very differently, there will be transition costs. So I think we need to make sure that while flexibility is going to be key and has a big role to play in the future, it will be driven by AI. We also have to make sure that actually energy affordability is at the forefront, and to make sure that whatever we do, that it actually benefits the consumer and we don't use something, like say AI for the AI's sake, but actually make sure it is planned, it is coordinated, and at the end of the day helps us have cheaper energy.
Thank you. John McGettrick has actually followed up a question on that answer. Do you think that we're going to see a growth in aggregators in the market?
I think there will be a growth in aggregators. I think so. Our views on flexibility is more is that it's a almost say so it's a time limited growth until you reach a steady state in the system, because where you use a lot of flexibility is basically you use flexibility in areas where it's going to be cheaper to procure flexibility than build new wires. So, and there is that, however, in those in those areas, the particularly that's going to be in rural areas, it just isn't, if you think about smart fridges in a rural area, there just aren't going to be that many that it would make sense for every individual person to trade it. So it's in that moment in those areas, there is a huge role for aggregators to play, because they will aggregate all of the flexible sources and you have one point of contact, one point of procurement. I think in those areas it does make sense. And then, but once the system has reached steady state, we've built a lot of new networks. I think within that, there will be a steady market for aggregators, but it's not going to be absolutely, I think, exploding in the next couple of years. But I think there's a system role that the aggregators will play. And again, a lot of them are built on basically, smart trading platforms.
Okay, thanks very much. Adele, question for you. It's really about acceptance of AI internally. Question Katie Butterworth asks, are you finding employee acceptance of AI tools and systems? Is there any resistance and people not wanting to use them? Have you found that kind of rolling out internally? And I guess this could apply across any sector, but in particular, how are you finding it in your experience?
So far, it has been a very positive experience, and actually particularly the adoption of our we call it light chat because we are very creative. Our virtual assistant has been quite high in different ways across the organization. Certain teams ask a lot of questions by every individual, certain and only a few individuals for team do use it. In other situations, it's far more widespread, but used less in depth, right? So we monitor the type of adoption, because it means that we can possibly help with slightly different use cases depending on the audience that we have. The adoption has been quite high and positive, and the response has been generally very positive. I suspect it's because of the engagement that we have carried out ahead of launching. We have not launched any of these application as a mandatory enterprise-wide push. Every application we have developed was very much developed upon a specific request from business users, whether they articulate a pain point, whether they have an idea that they have seen in other companies, or by talking with friends, they come up with the idea, and then our data scientist sits next to them and try to develop the use case and see whether it's something that we can achieve. And the other things we do is we roll out with a group, which are more or less numerous, of champions and chain champions, and they do use the tool for a period, and then we use them to cascade to the rest of the organization before launch. And so I believe that this type of engagement has really helped us kind of counter any negativity. All of our initiatives have been very focused on allowing people to be more productive, allowing people to be more efficient. They have they have not been designed for the purposes of, reducing our workforce, etc. So there is no such a threat associated to the type of initiatives that we are rolling out, which I suppose is also another important fear that one can put to bed before launch.
Leading on from that, we have a question about when you're thinking in terms of financing projects, how do you find that lenders, when you're going to them for support, how are they engaging, or how do they view the use of AI tools in this respect? Are they engaging with it? Are they trusting of them? And how does that conversation develop?
So to be fair, as I was saying before, the large majority of the systems and tools and applications that we have created are very much inward looking to make sure that we either create additional productivity or make our plants more efficient or more resilient, right? One of the use cases we discussed was potentially using AI and particularly scenario planning and machine learning to give us multiple scenarios for the purposes of our engagement with our lenders. That has been proven a bit more challenging because effectively what that does not provide the lenders or financial institution with is an opportunity to audit what type of scenario, financial assumptions, and then calculations we are using AI to deliver, and that element of auditing is quite critical for them, of course, and is something that we have not quite found a way to overcome as yet, if I'm honest. So we have not been particularly successful in deploying that this type of technology for that very purpose so far.
I guess it's still all very new for everybody. Carsten, I wonder, when you're doing your projects and developing your solutions, how much of it for you is the sort of getting around the fear is not the right word, but kind of skepticism around AI, and actually, ensuring that people can see the benefits, the sort of as Ezel was talking about.
Well, I believe the people side, the culture side, is probably more important than the technology side when talking AI. What we often see is that AI is treated like an IT project. So it will be an implementation schedule, and then there will be some champions, there will be some management of change, there will be some user adoption, and that can work well if you're talking about a small selection of POCs. But if you really want to go for an AI transformation within a company and you're pushing out LLMs, or you're pushing out whatever use of AI, you need to see it as bringing in a new intelligence into your organization. And if you're bringing in a new intelligence into an organization, it's almost like picturing you're bringing in 100 new team members. You wouldn't do that without taking a new look at your organizational charts, without taking a relook at your process flows, of your DOA structure. And that part I often see missing, and that then leads to frustration, which can lead to lower adoption, or it can lead to bottlenecks. So AI will make something work better, but the bottleneck stays the same somewhere else. I'm always trying to sort of put the people agenda up on front, and even to a point where I sometimes say it would even be better to have a HR manager as a sponsor than the IT manager. And it's more of a saying just to put the point out.
Okay, we're coming towards the end of the webinar, but I just want to talk about standards. It strikes me that there isn't really much of a common standards across all of this, and I wondered how much of that is perhaps a hindrance and an opportunity. Gianna, is lack of standards here a concern for you?
I think so, because I think everyone's very excited about AI, and rightfully so, because it brings huge opportunities. However, it's also quite new, so none of us have really operated stuff like in it. And I think what we're kind of seeing is at the moment, everyone is slightly working in isolation. So probably things that Adele and their Carsten teams are working on are similar things that we would be doing internally as well. So there's a lot of duplication, But given that at the heart of AI, this it's data. If you even have a fraction of a different way of portraying the data, the AI will learn something different effect from it. So I think you have you're duplicating a lot of things, but by that duplication, you're causing a lot of fragmentation as well. And I think kind of if you move to a slightly more standards, and it doesn't have to be, you know, absolute sort of like trading standards, for example, but like actually, if it's even a common assumptions, I think that would already be helpful. So I think that shared learning, common assumption, common aspiration, and so yeah, like shared like industry practices, I think more than standards, that would already be like a very helpful sort of like starting point because there's a lot of resources, a lot of money going into AI, but actually by just pooling our resources, we can probably do it better.
Thank you. Adele, what's your view here? Do you think there's a need for commonality or maybe common assumptions, as Gianna suggests?
I could not agree more. This is going to be a very quick answer. I think, particularly looking at the renewable energy industry, we are not the most, aged form of energy generation. And because we are still in our, I'm going to call it adolescence, because we have a lot of adolescence trait at times. We do have at times lack of standards and lack of protocols and lack of perhaps industry guidelines. Despite there are some industry trading organizations that do enormous efforts to put out their renewable energy standards and guidelines, we haven't quite reached the maturity of other energy generator. And I think that whilst we're still navigating that, and is not the fastest pace maturity journey. And I think we probably need, as an industry, to accelerate that pace because reaching the standard will really allow us to harvest the value and the opportunities that the AIs can give us in a way that we wouldn't otherwise been able to. So I couldn't agree more with John on this.
Thank you. So I guess there's also the dangers as well as there being upside for AI, there are potential downside. So, Carsten, when you're developing projects and AI solutions for your clients, how do you ensure that the risks of an AI downside are guarded against or mitigated against?
Well, we always push for having a human in the loop, so not replacing a human in the final decision making. I was at a trading conference, and I think my ending quote was, "AI cannot go to court. Your compliance officer or your trading officer will." And yeah, so we try to keep a human in the loop and make sure that AI is not taking over critical decisions. Now that will be more and more difficult as AI become more and more complex, but I think it's just important for the humans to keep on top of the critical decisions.
Human touch remains important. Absolutely. Okay, we are coming towards the end. I'd like our panelists just to each give us a single thing that they're taking away from the conversation today. Gianna.
Happy to. It's slightly echoing when I Carsten started before. I think for me the single takeaway sort of like from today into like January is AI is super exciting. It's super important, but also it's a lot more than just an IT thing. So it comes down to your sustainability, to your people, your governance, responsibility, all of that. So AI in itself is a whole ecosystem, and it shouldn't be treated as an isolation.
Thank you. Adele.
I like to look at this program and these initiatives as, the great transformational potential of our generation. But equally, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we protect our talent whilst going through this fantastic revolution that we have the opportunity of shaping. And so making sure that we keep skills trained and retrained is definitely key to the way we navigate this transition.
Carsten.
Well, if AI is a new intelligence that we need to learn how to work with, and taking maybe a step back, I think we also need to consider how are we educating the young people for a future with AI. are we putting them in the right boxes? Is the school system correct?
Great. Well, thank you very much. We are coming to the end. Many thanks indeed to the panel for their time and insights today. It's been a fascinating conversation. We will, of course, continue the conversations at the first Energy Transition Innovation Forum in Amsterdam on the 15th and 16th of April. Full details of how to secure best priced conference passes on the New Look Innovation Forum website. There'll be a link in the chat. Do look out for an exclusive webinar listener discount in your inbox shortly. We'll also be in touch with the webinar recordings in due course for you to share or listen again. But for now, I hope you found the past hour useful. I've been Ian Welsh. Thanks for joining us, and goodbye.